go further to the way that corruption manifests itself, right? First, let me add that it's very simple for us to diagnose corruption from other ways of fraudulent behavior, although they do sometimes come together. So in other words, corruption, in order to be corrupt, you sometimes have to do some sort of acts of fraud, falsify newspapers, forge something, and all this come together, and we have to sort of disentangle them conceptually because they simply have different causes. Most of the forgery or fraudulent behaviors are treated in the criminal law. Corruption is more difficult to treat, and in many, many countries, corruption is insufficiently treated because it's really difficult to diagnose, and because laws, unfortunately, tend to be made by people who are in the parliament or people who are in the government and who have most power, and they are reluctant to create legislation which will punish themselves. What do we need in order to have, a clear legislative reflection of corruption? Well, we need a clear definition of corruption. In this clear definition of corruption, have to understand that both a public and a private part should be involved in this. Sometimes, they can be very close to one another. It can be a person who gives an office to his brother, who gives a favor to his brother. But nevertheless, you have to have this public-private trespassing to call something corruption. There has to be some undue profit for an official. In most countries where corruption is criminalized, you have to have this profit in one form or another. Now, this profit can vary wildly, people can exchange favors. It doesn't necessarily have to be a monetary bribe, you do me this favor and I do you this other favor, but this also should be able to be defined and diagnosed as undue profit in order to prosecute this person. Finally, more often than not, there is a social cost to corruption that I alluded to earlier. You should be able to get that somebody was discriminated, or that something which was intended to be done with the diverted money was not done. So you should be able to calculate a social cost, either as discrimination or an economic opportunity cost. Let's say you were supposed to build a bridge with this money, and the money was stolen and the build was never really built, and therefore there is a cost for this. Finally, corruption has to be illegal in order to be prosecuted. Now, we have quite a lot of situations of legal corruption, and more we agree in the global anti-corruption community, which has become quite important, sizable, in the last years, that there is quite a lot of legal corruption going on. The only disagreement is if this legal corruption which doesn't trespass existing legislation, should be addressed by criminal means, put a special article in the criminal code and taken to court, or actually by good governance means, simply by reforming legislation and by removing these opportunities from corruption from laws. So, in other words, in order to diagnose a corruption situation out of all these things that I mentioned here, what is important is to have public and private party, right? What is important is to have undue profit for the official. And the third thing is that you should have a separation between public and private. The others, legality or lack of legality and social costs are like some sort of extra elements, they're not mandatory.